Welcome to the Vault Excel. Thank you for joining me this late evening. This is an in-depth discussion pertaining to the mindset of Chris Watts, the mindset of those who have reached out to him in prison. And one of those people is a Christa Richello. I'm going to discuss her this evening. And we're also going to go back in time to the crime and play you audio from the district attorney describing what happened that fateful morning that a family was unalived by Mr. Chris Watts. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to donate to this great network, $McAngie. 129 Cash App, stickers, and chats are welcome during this live stream. Oxygen True Crime is the source of this information. A former prison psychologist is defending her close relationship with Chris Watts, whom she feels is innocent. Now, this content was uploaded June 24th, 2021. Christa Rello was one of many who sent the Family Annihilator fan mail after he murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their two daughters, according to a press release for Lifetime's Cellmate Secrets, Chris Watts, which will explore his life behind bars and the bond he's formed with Richello. Chris still receives an overwhelming amount of fan mail behind bars, and when his cellmate, Dylan Tallman, responded on his behalf to a fan letter from Christa Rello, it was the beginning of a close and intimate relationship between the trio, the press release states. The Lifetime special aired at that time on Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those unfamiliar with the notoriously brutal case, Watts killed his entire family in August of 2018. He first strangled his wife, Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant, with their son inside their Frederick, Colorado home, before smothering their young daughters, Bella 4 and Celeste 3. After disposing of their bodies at an oil drilling site where he worked, he attempted to play the role of a concerned husband and dad whose family had gone missing. But that facade soon crumbled. It became evident that he'd been having an affair, and after the bodies were discovered, he was arrested before ultimately pleading guilty to their murders. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite the fact that Chris gave a 5-hour interview detailing the killing of his family following his conviction, he still has supporters and fans. Richello is one such example. The 42-year-old former prison psychologist, and this was about 3 years ago, so she should be about 45 now, is adamant that Chris Watts is innocent, and she's currently writing a book with both him and his cellmate Dylan, whom she is now engaged to, but we learned in the interview with Dr. Oz, they are no longer engaged. Chris Watts and Christa Rello, there are photos of them in the set commentary if you're curious by Lifetime. I found it very odd the way the case was handled, she says in the show, according to the clip obtained by E! Online. I've never seen a case in history that somebody took a plea agreement so quickly a case was completely ended and not investigated. She says in the show that there's no way he could have committed these crimes, citing his devotion to religion and spirituality. Richello relates in the show that she's drawn to people in prison and would visit her incarcerated father, who, as the clip shows, bore a striking resemblance to Charles Manson as a child. She claims that being attracted to notorious men is in her DNA and says that her mother was actually on her way to live with the Manson family on their California ranch when she met Richello's dad. It's pretty interesting because my mom did stand up for Charles Manson, and I'm standing up for Chris Watts, she said in the show. In interviews, she gets into her relationship with the two men who apparently consider themselves brothers. Although some suspect that there's more going on with the two men, the Lifetime press release states. Why Entertainment, Yahoo.com is the source. Hello, everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for joining me. This Richello lady would visit her own father in prison. Do not know what he was in prison for. She felt a connection to Mr. Watts after, I guess, connecting with him. But the interesting part of that story is that when she first reached out to him by letter, he gave the letter, along with her photograph, to this Dylan character. And they weren't cellmates. His dorm room was next door to Chris Watts' room. They had adjoining cells, not together. See, his ideology was that he was in love with somebody else, so he couldn't correspond with her. So this is allegedly the reason why he gave her letters to this other guy. So she started corresponding with that guy. One thing led to another. She called herself being in love. They were engaged. Then they were unengaged. She specifically tells Dr. Oz in the interview, I would play it, but it'll be copyrighted, so I can't play the content, that, yes, she fell for him, but that guy felt like she really cared for Chris. And I would agree, because what one would have to tell themselves is this. You originally wrote to Chris Watts, but he declined to talk to you at first and passed on your information to Dylan. So if you could fall for Dylan, why would I not believe you weren't originally interested in talking to Chris Watts, okay? So it's like, what is the point of trying to deny that you were actually interested? You just said here in this content that you are attracted to these type of men, bad boys, which is however. So you're contradicting yourself. You're a psychologist, so you should know better than to play these mind games and what I would call word games, boggle, with the general public. Allegedly, she was the prison psychologist. That's even worse, because she's supposed to be there to be helping the men, talk to them, work out their problems. I don't know. I don't know if she's at another prison or not. It just said former prison psychologist. I've not watched the Lifetime segments. I will dive into them at a later date. But I wanted to talk about the many letters that he has received in the past and probably still receiving, and this lady here. You see, it takes all kinds. And as I said in my live stream earlier today, that all walks of life have entered into prison. All walks of life have corresponded with people in prison. But some people may judge a person's ideology for doing so. Why are you talking to someone locked up? Why are you talking to somebody that's committed a heinous crime? Now, you want to talk to someone in jail, friend, family, pen pal, Facebook, whatever, that's your choice. But when you're talking about someone who was unalive people for no reason, wasn't self-defense, you have to ask yourself, what is the motivation? This man unalived his family. 2 living children, and 1 was in the womb, and the mother. So why would you want to reach out to this person? This would lead people to believe that this lady and so many other women who have reached out to him, you have something mentally wrong with you, because whether you are attracted to the bad guy, bad boy image, when you have become a murderer, you have stepped over the line of what I would consider the bad boy, the rebel, the guy that's a little rough around the edges, been in trouble a bit. We're past that stage. This man took out a whole family, sat in court with his head down, pretending to weep, but he put himself in that situation. And over time, there have been many negative things said about the wife, which is disrespectful, because in the end, you choose who you navigate with. If you see you're in a relationship that is not beneficial to you, then you should bow out. And that's the road he did not take. He was a coward. He had some type of issues. And usually these issues come from childhood. Everybody knows this. You don't wake up one day and decide to unalive a household full of people. And it didn't matter what type of wife he had, what her disposition was at the time of death. There's no excuse to kill these people. All you had to do was walk away. And they would have believed that he told his wife on that fateful morning that he didn't love her, didn't want to be with her. Whatever issues they had, he still had no right to take her life and take those children's lives. He could have easily left, but I feel he didn't want to pay the price. And we see this a lot with crimes of murder. The person doesn't want to pay the piper. They don't want to divide up estate. They don't want to divide up property, monies, savings. So they get rid of the person, or they pay somebody to get rid of them. And that's what I think happened here. He wanted a clean slate without the responsibility of having to pay child support, a possible spousal support, divide up money, so on and so forth. Although we hear that they were in debt, but still, nonetheless, he didn't want to have to pay the piper. So he took the easy way out. but look at the consequences. You hear this woman saying that she can't believe he did it. He seems spiritual. Well, it's all an act. And you will hear that commentary in the Dr. Oz segment. He tells her he's a manipulator. Exactly. That's how he got with that other lady who is now in the witness protection program. Where is she? I do not know. The woman he had the affair with. Sure, somebody recognizes her face somewhere. And how terrible that must be to have to uproot your life because you got involved with some man, knowing he was married, not knowing. It doesn't really matter. The point is everybody played a part. But I do believe he is the one who unalived the family, and that's why he pled guilty. So I don't know why she's so shocked that he would plead guilty. She never seen a case where a person would plead guilty so fast, no investigation. Well, there doesn't need to be an investigation if the person has pled guilty and they've given you the scenario of what happened. He obviously realized he was caught. He was caught by leaving her car in the drive. He was caught by the neighbor's video of him backing up his truck. No one seen coming or going out of the house. He's leaving in the AM. You use deduction. And he knew that. And once he stood in that house with the police and the friend playing back the video, he knew he was caught. It's common sense. But why are so many people, women specifically, enamored with this man, sending letters? They're just as delusional as this Christa was. Well, still is. She's still supporting him and still talking to him. And she's a psychologist, and that's even more scary. One would say, how could she be so diluted? And she has studied psychology. He didn't do it. He loves God, blah, blah, blah. That's what he's telling you now. But who said he was talking about God and spirituality when he was with his family? He probably was not. Probably didn't even go to church. She doesn't know that because she's got something mentally wrong with her. Her psyche is tainted. And as I said, most of our dispositions are formed from things we endured in childhood. She's attracted to the bad boy. And as I said, he's far removed from the bad boy syndrome. He has stepped over the line. He is a murderer of many. Christa, should you even be helping others? Because are you in a position to help those in need with mental issues? Probably not. Miss Richello, you went from writing him, he wasn't interested, he gave the mail to his friend, and then you started a relationship with him. That shows right there there's something wrong with you, that you have some serious issues, ma'am. Very serious issues. Then you had the audacity to be engaged to the man. And he felt like you were more attracted to Mr. Chris, which I do believe you were. A rumor went around a couple years ago that I had never heard before because I didn't stay glued to this debacle once he got, found guilty of the homicides, that he was having an affair with this Dylan guy. They were calling it a love triangle of sorts. You'll hear all this information during the Dr. Oz segment. She says that was not true. There was no triangle of she, Chris, and Dylan. She says Chris got money through commissary and he would buy things and he would share it with this guy. So people took it upon themselves, whoever put the rumor out, that when underwear and Vaseline were found in the guy's cell, it had Chris's name on it. But she said the one thing that was not revealed is that other items were also in the cell that had Chris's name on it because Chris had given him all types of items from commissary, not just underwear and Vaseline. And she said he would use the Vaseline to put on his lips because they were chapped. You're entitled to believe what you want. But we have learned that men do take up with men in prison. And as we have learned, once a man realizes he's never coming out of prison, he may decide to keep the company of another man. Is he now bisexual inside of this prison? I don't know. Don't really care. But that was one of the rumors mentioned and discussed during the Dr. Oz segment. Feel free to go into the YouTube queue to upload those said content to your discretion. Why the fascination with a murderer? This woman is a professional, as I said, studies psychology. Why? At some point, she and Chris began to speak and talk. He described the crimes to her. She said he wept, he showed remorse. But we have learned he has said all types of things over the years pertaining to those crimes. Grandiose is what has been described about Mr. Chris Watts. Psychopath. Everyone has a different opinion of who he is, what his mental state, diagnoses. So let's see if we can find something to describe him and understand how he came to be and how these women and why are these women wanting to talk to him. And we hear this a lot with men locked up in prison, just in general. They want to reach out, want to talk to them. Then they're dating them. Then they say they're engaged or they're married. And then we usually find out later down the road if the men happen to be released. It usually doesn't work out. Because it's a ploy inside to get attention, to get money, to get help. And he even asked her, do you believe he's manipulating you? And she did say, yes, I do believe Chris Watts was trying to manipulate me. I was kind of stunned that she even admitted that. Okay. Now, most of you have heard of Miss Shirley Cato, who has written to him a correspondence, and she's given out that certain information pertaining to what she learned by talking to Mr. Chris Watts. Trying to get something about his diagnoses. Chris Watts displayed traits of both grandiose and vulnerable narcissism, but the stronger connection lies with psychopathy, evident in his introversion, hypersensitivity to criticism, callousness, unemotional nature, anger, aggression, and engagement in fantasies of success, power, and ideal love. You see, he was a quiet person, introvert, as you hear in this commentary, had a little weight on him back in the day, talked about relationships during a seminar. All that information came out after, the heinous crime. And one would go back in time to try to figure out, how did this person become this Chris Watts? Family annihilator, psychopath. What happened to him? Why couldn't he just have left? I guess you would have to ask him. Let's see what this Ada Phi has to say pertaining to Mr. Watts. Psychopathic narcissism, infidelity played a significant role in the tragic events. And this is someone else's opinion, of course. You're entitled to agree to disagree. Chris Watts' affair with Nicole Kessinger led to deterioration of his marriage with Shannon. Well, one could say that's not necessarily true, because he 9 times out of 10 already had something wrong with him. You don't wake up to become a psychopath, sociopath. Come on now. Those are traits you already have in you. And as scholars will say, a psychopath, sociopath, narcissist is not necessarily going to become a murderer. But a murderer usually is a narcissist, sociopath, and psychopath. Okay? They usually have those traits, murderers. But you can be grandiose, narcissist, and never commit the heinous crime of unaliving a human being. He was already a problem person to himself. He may not exhibit it to where it was noticeable, but he already had issues of being insecure, probably a pleaser, probably felt like he was in love with Shanann when he first met her, so on and so forth, and realized down the road it wasn't what he wanted. And one would have to say, no matter what happened between he and the woman he had an affair with, he would have done the same, because he is the same person. And to blame a woman for what he did is immature, and it's vile. Because in the end, he had these jacked up feelings toward life. Had nothing to do with what she was doing. And I'm not saying a person can't be pushed, buttons can't be pushed, but you're talking about unaliving an entire family, and then to say what? He did all this for a woman? So you think that if he had gotten with her, never been arrested, how do you think the life would have turned out with that lady? You think she would have never had expectations? They never would have fought, had disagreements. You think that woman wouldn't have wanted children? Stay woke now. That's the whole point of him getting rid of the family. He no longer wanted to be responsible. So getting with her would have been foolish. But this is the jacked up ideology he had. Oh, she'll make everything go away. Things will be better with her. But who's to say that her wouldn't have wanted children? So he would have been right back in the same scenario. Had he never been arrested, he would have walked right back into Salem's lot with the mistress. Chris Watts displayed distant and cold behavior towards his wife, leading her to suspect infidelity. Did he plan the murders? Yes. Chris Watts showed signs of planning his escape and displayed calculated behavior before and after the murders. Now, I'm not going to read all the things of what he did because we're going to let the district attorney tell us that during court. But we're going to talk about his ways. Psychopathic narcissism leading to the breakdown of his marriage and the tragic murders. Chris Watts, a psychopath with superficial charm and poor behavioral controls, committed impulsive and calculated murders while maintaining emotional stability. And you'll see that during his interviews with the news and the police coming to search the home, him pleading for the family to be found. He was very cool, calm, and collected. Chris Watts displayed traits of both grandiose and vulnerable narcissism. Both the stronger connection lies with psychopathy, evident in his introversion, hypersensitivity to criticism, callousness, unemotional nature, anger, aggression, and engagement in fantasies of success, power, and ideal love. The affair, psychopathy and narcissism, led to the tragic murders of his wife and children, highlighting the dangers of infidelity and the need for understanding and prevention. This is by Edify. Entitled to Your Opinion. But if you've lived long enough, such as the Queen, you realize it wasn't about the affair. That's just the icing on the cake. He had mental issues that nobody knew about. He was the type that couldn't express what he actually felt. And when you watch the documentary on Netflix that came out many years ago, you could see that in the text messages between the wife and Mr. Watts. She would go on and on and on about what was wrong. And his replies were very simple, simplistic. No bickering, no arguing, no name calling. He was basically goading her and playing possum, leading her to think everything was fine. Traveling back and forth out of town. She would travel on this side of the country to visit family, so on and so forth. He's back home canoodling with another woman, playing the role. I do believe it was planned, poorly planned, the unaliving of the wife and the children, because that's where this fantasy comes in. He had built up this fantasy in his head. He hadn't even known the woman probably not even a month and had already built up this fantasy. Now, fast forward, he's incarcerated. We have these women writing letters, psychologists writing to him, but then saying, oh, I wasn't really interested. I became interested in his friend. And it shows you he's a control freak. The fact that he got her mail and then gave it to the guy in the next cell. In his mind, he was allegedly in love with somebody else. And who might that have been? Who was it he was in love with? Some other woman he was talking to in prison. And then he has said that he believes the mistress had been writing him using aliases. Very interesting. Or is that just his psyche wanting him to, making him believe she was writing him using aliases? I don't know. It'll be jacked up to find out she was writing him using aliases. That would be very jacked up. Has she moved on from this debacle, the mistress? Does she no longer have feelings for Chris Watts? Does she cringe at his name? She wondering, how in the world did I get wrapped up with this man not knowing he was sick? Because that's the whole point of the story. He was an adult when he committed these crimes. He would have done it with her. He would have done it with any woman. That's the point. Once his mind decided to check out, he would have done it whether he was with Shanann, Sheila, Mary. It doesn't matter. That's what a person needs to understand about a psychotic human being. It's the circumstances, not the person. Because anybody can emulate the same circumstances. Thank you for joining me. Let's get a little information about women writing men in prison. Thank you all for joining me. One second, everybody. Washington Post is the source. Greetings from New York, Chris, a Brooklyn-based woman wrote to Christopher Watts August 23rd, days after he admitted to murdering his pregnant wife and young daughters, loading the bodies into the truck, dumping them at an oil work site. I found myself thinking a lot about you, Tashiana confessed to the now convicted killer. I figured life is too short to hold back, so here I am. The 29-year-old enclosed a bikini-clad photo of herself on a beach, so you can place a face to the words. I know what you look like, so I thought I'd make it fair, she flirted. I hope I've put a smile on your face. But if Tashiana failed, many others also aimed to cheer him up. Watts was charged August 20th with multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of pregnancy, and tampering with a deceased human body. He pleaded guilty. In November, a Colorado judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms in prison, 1 for each murder victim. In his time behind bars, documents obtained from the prosecutor's office by the Washington Post show Tashiana's was just one among many letters he received from hopeful suitors and fans. Candace, a 39-year-old mother of 2, wrote multiple times. Her second letter ended with #Team Chris, #love him, and a doodled heart. I've been watching your interview and I just became attracted to you. Don't ask me why, she said in one missive, adding that if he wrote back, she would be the happiest girl alive, quote unquote. Another woman named Christian began by addressing the elephant in the room. No, I'm not a creep or crazy. She was drawn to Watts when she watched him take a deep breath as the judge read out his murder charges. She said, I know how alienating this process can be. Now, one would say, how would she know that? She's never been arrested for unaliving people. So how would she know about the process? How in the world could she possibly know? Thank you, Green Eye. Thank you so very much. Tammy, 36, described herself as a simple girl living in a small town and included photos. She noted that it was her first time writing to an inmate and that she was actually very nervous. The Ohio-based woman asked Watts, why is someone as pretty as me single and writing to someone in jail? She recently came out of a bad breakup, she explained. So, you're downing yourself. But is that a reason to write a man who unalived his family because you just broke up with someone? Let's address this. Why write this man in prison? How a woman could fall for a man jailed for killing his family might seem perplexing, but this decades-old phenomenon is far from unusual. Front page offenders like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, the Menendez brothers have also been pursued behind bars by countless women. The incarcerated individual is likely to have become part of a sadomasochistic fantasy for many of these women, given how popular true crime shows are and how accessible the offenders are. Catherine Peer, a psychiatrist on the faculty at the University of California at San Francisco, told the Washington Post. It's a way of flirting with danger while risking nothing, said Peer, who has worked with felons. The women writing killers are often victims of abuse and gravitate toward aggressors. Getting involved with a man behind bars puts them in positions of control. These women will most likely never have the chance to meet the man they're pursuing, and if they did, they'd be protected by the prison system. Sheila Eisenberg, author of Women Who Love Men Who Kill, echoed Peer. It was less about chasing celebrity or being with a notorious killer, Eisenberg said. Being in love with a man behind bars is exciting. You don't know what's going to happen. There's always an adrenaline rush. Then came a second type of woman who vies for the attention of someone like Christopher Watts. Eisenberg attributed the shift to the current celebrity worshiping culture and the rise of social media platforms, which have allowed for an explosion of female fans to come out of the woodwork. In part, she said, the women who write to killers like Watts want to be famous and well known also. It is more a case of, hey, I want to be famous. Pick me. In the past, true crime narratives making national headlines were reserved mostly for mass murderers. Now serial killer groupies have open communication forums. They generate Facebook groups and Reddit posts, giving notice to men who otherwise would have been little known. Garden variety killers. Exactly. The more famous the person, the more magnetic he is. It makes domestic murderers like Watts public figures. They become notorious, said Eisenberg, who is working on a follow-up book, More Women Who Love Men Who Kill. The media frenzy and online attention around people like Watts prompted me to realize there is a whole new genre of relationships between murderers and women on the outside. Very interesting. This content was written by Deanna Paul, a former New York City prosecutor who covered New York courts and law enforcement for the Wall Street Journal. She left the Post in January of 2020. WashingtonPost.com is the source. Very interesting information. So these women want to be famous as well, want to be recognized. So they're just as insecure as Mr. Watts and the men that they chase that are incarcerated for unaliving human beings. I'm sure he had a lot of fantasies in his head of what he wanted his life to be, how he thought it was going to turn out with his wife, Shanann, and the children. And in walks this girl he called himself falling for. But it was all a mystery, all a fantasy world. And that's the same thing that these women are doing, as you heard in this commentary. You're safe at home behind your computer and your iPhone, writing this guy or video chatting. You know you're never going to have a successful relationship because 9 times out of 10, it would not work if he was free. Because what you have to ask yourself is the obvious. He is incarcerated for a reason. And he would have done the same to you. How would you have been different? And those are the lies we tell ourselves even in relationships when we're free. I'm different than her. I would treat him better. I would do this. I would be this. But in the end, it's imaginary. Because your wants and your needs may not be the wants and needs of the man. And how he's going to act and respond, you don't know how it's going to turn out. And you see this with a lot of failed relationships and courtships of people who are actually free and walking around. You can't make somebody care for you. You can't make somebody like you. You can jump through hula hoops all day and night, cry, moan, stomp. You can't make a person have genuine affection for you. And that's what Shanann was trying to do with her husband, Mr. Chris Watts. Nothing she did was enough because he had checked out. It is alleged that they were in debt. It was alleged that she liked to spend. And as you saw the house, she had a very beautiful home, but they couldn't afford it. They were behind in, I believe, homeowners association fees. They were in debt. And maybe he was that guy. He wanted to please her. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to have what she wanted, nice things, so on. But that's still no reason to unalive a human being. The thing to do is stand up and say, hey, we don't have the money for this or that. We're drowning. We're in debt. I can't afford this. We can't afford this. I don't want this. You don't go and unalive a person because of decisions that they've made or decisions that you decided to sign on. That's what his problem was. He didn't have the balls to speak up for himself. And there are a lot of people like Chris Watts. They don't tell people how they feel. They just go along with the flow. And then all of that anger and aggression builds up. It builds up. And then there's a catastrophe. And then there's the point of no return. And these women who are writing letters to him, they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea that they are going into the belly of the beast. And if they had to actually go and live a life with him, they would be sorely disappointed. Sorely. Because as I said, you do not wake up a psychopath. You just don't wake up that way. You've always had the tendencies. You may not have exhibited, but you were sick all along. He was sick. And right now, this talk about Christianity and spirituality, he's hiding behind that. And that is what a lot of inmates do. They hide behind Allah and Christianity and so on and so forth. It's a front. You have to remember, they've been lying to themselves and others for some time, pretending to be something that they're not. So how easy is it to hide behind God once locked up? Oh, I've got to do this. It's my faith. It's this. Just a lot of crazy nonsense. And this psychiatrist, Christa, she was just as delusional as Mr. Watts. She knew she could never have anything with him. He was never coming out of there. And I don't know if she actually believed he didn't commit this crime, but she's a psychologist and she had to know better, that he's a grand manipulator. He's a chameleon. He's been hiding his feelings for a long time as an adult because he learned this probably from childhood. And when you watch his mother speak, you'll realize he has traits of his mother. The mother is delusional. For her to say, I don't care what my son did, I still love you, shows you why he's unraveled. Because the mother is not mentally stable. Your son has just killed his whole family. What do you mean? You don't care what he has done. So in her eye, he is still her golden boy. So then you start to see how he came to be. He could do no wrong in the eyes of his parents or mother. Put up on a pedestal. But all along, they were building a monster. Or the monster was born from the womb. Take your pick. Very delusional mother. So it didn't shock me how Chris Watts came to be the person he came to be. What's baffling is a psychologist wanting to write this man, snoozing up to the friend. But all in all, I do believe, yes, Chris was the one she wanted to talk to. And in the end, they ended up corresponding. And he was telling her personal things about the unaliving of the family. And one would have to say, how in the world could she sit there and listen to that nonsense? But he's a manipulator. He needed another ear once he decided to correspond with her. She's just another word game, piece of a puzzle. And that's all Chris Watts is ever going to be. A locked up manipulator going nowhere. He's going to die in prison. And he could have had a good life out here, whether it was with Shanann or whomever. But he chose not to follow through. He chickened out, cowered out. And now these people are not alive because he couldn't just face the music and say, I'm not happy. I don't want to be a father. I don't want to be a husband. That's all he had to say. He's not the first and he's not the last. There are a lot of people who are walking around holding the same type of emotions and insecurities that Chris Watts has, and they refuse to own it. And they play the role pretending to be happy, and they're not. And this is how things go bump in the night when people don't own their true feelings in relationships. The psychologist, Ms. Richello, where is she now? What is she doing? Is she dating? Does she have children? Does she still correspond with Mr. Chris Watts? Is Chris still friends with Dylan? Very interesting information. The Washington Post was the last source of that information. Let's go back in time, everybody, pertaining to Mr. Watts and the crime itself. And then we'll go back to Ms. Richello and make sense of why anyone would want to be involved with Mr. Watts behind bars. Thank you for joining me. Inside Edition is my first source. Thank you.
Were unspeakable. The murders of his pregnant wife and 2 little daughters. Yet 33-year-old Chris Watts is actually receiving love letters. In my heart, you're a great guy, writes a woman named Candace. If you do write me back, I'd be the happiest girl alive, that's for sure. She signed off with hashtags Team Chris, Chris is innocent, love him, and so cute. Another woman named Tatiana wrote, I found myself thinking a lot about you. Sent a photo of herself in a bikini. A woman named Kim wrote, I'm hoping to brighten your days. Hannah wrote Chris Watts' name in flowery calligraphy and told him, I feel this connection to you. Many of the letters, which were released by prosecutors, are signed with hearts and X's and O's for hugs and kisses.
These women have created a fantasy lives for themselves, especially with their pretend relationship with these men behind bars.
Psychologist Dr. Judy Ho, co-host of TV's Face the Truth, says even the worst killers have groupies who write, visit, and even propose marriage.
It's oftentimes what we talk about when women seem to be attracted to bad boys. It's because they want to be the special person that can turn this life around and then be able to attribute that to their own self-esteem.
Parkland school shooter Nicholas Cruz, Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, and wife killer Scott Peterson all received love letters from women. Now Chris Watts joins that notorious list.
Just the numerous letters that they showed here in this commentary, that's probably not even the bulk of letters. Very, very sickening. Like I said, there's nothing wrong if you want to talk to somebody locked up, but you do need to understand the person that you're talking to, especially if there's one who may be getting out of prison soon. Do you really want to be involved with someone that unalived a person? Even if they were young when they did the crime. I'm going to speak on something personal. I had talked to someone once. They had reached out to me on Facebook years ago, and they were in prison for unaliving a young guy. They had some words or something, and he unalived the guy, and he got, a nice lengthy sentence, about under 20 years, about 17 years or so. The thing I found interesting about his conversation back then was that he didn't seem to have empathy. He had made a comment to me saying, if your mother, father, whomever passed away, I would feel bad, but not like, how did he word it? Not to the point where he would just be, exacerbated with grief, I guess. He said, I would feel bad for you. I'd feel bad for you that you were grieving, but he wouldn't necessarily feel anything. So I told myself, imagine that's what led him to unalive that guy. Whatever it was that they had a beef about, petty, they were kids. He took that guy's life. That guy's no longer alive. So now you fast forward many years later, he's pen paling whomever, reaching out, see your picture, blah, 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 message you. I responded back through Messenger or whatever. And then he told me his story. And that's the first thing I thought to myself. You probably haven't learned anything, even though you've been incarcerated. And that's what people need to understand about jail, prison. You can't assume that a person has gained knowledge. You can't assume that a person has empathy because they're in prison. They've done 2 years, 15 years, 17 years, 20 years. That's a myth. The fact they found God, Allah, whomever, that's a myth. That's just talk, because talk is cheap. Many people have been duped by people in jail saying they've changed, they've learned their lesson. Then they get out here and they treat the people just as bad as whomever they treated before they got into prison. Now, mind you, he went in as a young man, maybe 18, 19 or so, but he still doesn't have any empathy, and that's not good. Then, too, he's had no life of dealing with people to try to learn how to navigate and deal with emotions. So who's to say that he gets back out here, which I think he has been released about 2 years ago. I think he got out. He probably could do it again. And that's the whole point. They don't get therapy in prison for violence, insecurities. So they walk back out here into the real world. They're still that same person that committed that crime and can still have the propensity. Now, some people do come out and do very well, navigate well, work, start a family, so on and so forth, reunite with family, children. Then some people don't fare well because that's the whole point. You need therapy so you don't end up in the same situation that got you incarcerated in the first place. So this Chris Watts, this is a whole nother level because he lives in his own world. And people like that, you can't do anything with anybody like that. Because as I said, he's been carrying around a lot of wounded spirits before he even got with Shanann. That's why he felt like she was the one. So now he's incarcerated. He's felt that way about some woman he's met through correspondence. She's the one. But we already know there could never be a one because you can't fully commit to somebody if you can easily check out and think to unalive them. That should be the farthest thing from your mind because a relationship isn't working out. Well, let me go ahead and suffocate these kids. Let me go ahead and strangle my wife because I like this lady over here. So then what are you going to do with her when you get with her and things don't go well? You would do the same. Thank you for joining me. Let's get on to the next content, everybody. My movie of the week is Unsettled by BK Films. It's in the YouTube queue, and it's also on my community page if you need verification for that movie. We're going to listen to the DA, and then we're going to go back to the numerous letters sent to him and probably still, and then ask yourself, after you hear the description from the district attorney, why any woman or even a man would want to write to Chris Watts professing love, affection, friendship for a stranger you do not know and a man who has pled guilty to those crimes and will never see the light of day outside of a prison wall jumpsuit. Ask yourself, after you hear these details, what would possess any woman to want to be involved with Chris Watts and correspond with him. Thank you for joining me. 9 News is the source. One moment, please. Having some difficulties here. Mercy. If you'd like to donate, $, McAndrew, 129 Cash App, stickers and chats are welcome. Give me your feedback during this live stream pertaining to the information.
Your Honor, there are no words to adequately describe the unimaginable tragedy that brings us before this court today. By my comments, I'm not even going to try to express the horror, the pain, or the suffering that the defendant has caused to these families, to this community, and to all who were a part of this investigation. However, I do want to spend a few minutes sharing with the court the details of the crime, as so far you've only had an opportunity to review the affidavit and a few facts here and there that have been offered to the court in the motions and pleadings that have been filed. The questions that have screamed out to anyone who will listen since August 13th of 2018 are why and how. Why did this have to happen? How could a seemingly normal husband and father annihilate his entire family? For what? See, these are the questions that only one individual in this courtroom or on this planet knows the answers to. I fully expect we will not receive the answers to these questions today, nor will we at any point in the future. I don't expect that he will ever tell the truth about what truly happened or why. Even if he did, there is no rational way that any human being could find those answers acceptable responses to such horrific questions. The best we can do is try to piece together some kind of understanding from the evidence that is available to us. And the evidence tells us this. The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. Not in a fit of rage, not by way of accident, but in a calculated and sickening manner. Shanann was 34 years old. She had married the defendant in November of 2012. Over the weekend leading up to August 13th, she had been at a work conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and returned home in the early morning hours of August 13th. We know that she got home about 1:45 in the morning. The doorbell camera on their home shows her arriving back home from the airport. Shortly thereafter, at least according to the defendant, they had what he referred to as an emotional conversation about the state of their marriage and about what their lives would look like going forward. What was said during that emotional conversation, only he knows. What we do know is that shortly after that, the defendant strangled her to death with his own hands. We know that he slowly took her life the morning of August 13th. We know that this was not done in an uncontrolled, vengeful manner that he tried to describe to agents from CBI and the FBI. If that were the case, you would expect to see vicious, horrible bruising about her neck, shoulders, and face. You would expect to see the highway bone in her neck broken. You would expect to see some kind of defensive wounds on his body as she struggled and fought for her own life. None of those are present. The only injuries that were on Shanann's body were one set of finger or bruising, what appeared to be fingernail or finger mark bruising to the right side of her neck. We know that our experts will tell us that it takes 2 to 4 minutes to strangle someone to death manually with their own hands. The horror that she felt is the man that she
Let's
loved
go back there for a second.
Her neck, shoulders, and face. You would expect to see the highway bone in her neck broken. You would expect to see some kind of defensive wounds on his body as she struggled and fought for her own life. None of those are present.
Wow.
The only injuries that were on Shanann's body were one set of finger or bruising, what appeared to be fingernail or finger mark bruising to the right side of her neck. We know that our experts will tell us that it takes 2 to 4 minutes to strangle someone to death manually with their own hands.
2 to 4 minutes.
The horror that she felt is the man that she loved wrapped his hands around her throat and choked the life out of her must have been unimaginable. Even worse, what must Bella, age 4, and Celeste, age 3, must have experienced or thought as their father, the one man on this planet who was supposed to nurture and protect them, was snuffing out their lives. They both died from smothering. Let me say that again. The man seated to my right smothered his daughters. Why? Imagine the horror in Bella's mind as her father took her last breaths away. Your Honor, understand very clearly, Bella fought back for her life. The frenulum, the connective tissue between her upper lip and her gum, had a centimeter and a half laceration. She bit her tongue multiple times before she died. She fought back for her life as her father smothered her.
Now, while the district attorney is reading his statement to the court, Chris Watts holds his head down the entire time, kind of shaking his head in disbelief, maybe weeping, not really sure, can't see with his head down. Attorneys looking, one looking straight ahead, the female attorney, and the male attorney looking downward as well. Did he actually feel something while this man was reading the description of what he had done to his family? They said he did not want to be labeled a killer, that he did not like that description of himself. Well, Chris Watts, that is what you did. That is who you are. That is who you are.
Celeste had no such injuries. In fact, she had no external injuries at all. But according to the medical examiner, she was smothered nonetheless.
Cecilia, this is Publishers Clearinghouse.
Oh, sorry about that. Missed that. Didn't know they had a commercial. Sorry about that, you guys.
The defendant then methodically and calmly loaded their bodies into his work truck, not in a hasty or disorganized way. He was seen from the neighbor's doorbell camera, backing his truck into the driveway, going back and forth into the house and back out to the truck 3 different times, one time for each of their bodies. He then drove them away from their family home one final time, intent on hiding any evidence of the crimes that he had just committed. In one final sign of callousness for his wife, his daughters, and their unborn son, and their remains, he drove them to a location that he thought no one would ever find them, to one of the oil tank batteries with which he was so familiar. He knew this was safe. He had texted a coworker the night before saying, "I'll head out to that site. I'll take care of it." He had carefully ensured that he would be alone in the middle of the plains to secrete away the remains of his family in a place that he hoped they would never be found. In one final measure of disrespect for the family he once had, he ensured that they would not be together, even in death, or so he thought. He disposed of them in different locations. He buried Shanann and Nico in a shallow grave away from the oil tanks. Bella and Celeste were thrown away in the oil tanks at this facility. Different tanks, so these little girls wouldn't be together in death. Imagine this, Your Honor. This defendant took those little girls and put them through a hatch at the top of an oil tank, 8 inches in diameter. Bella had scratches on her left buttocks from being shoved through this hole. A tuft of blonde hair was found on the edge of one of these hatches.
Oh, wow.
The defendant told investigators that Bella's tank seemed emptier than CC's because of the sound that the splashes made. These were his daughters.
Wow.
Significantly, when his coworkers arrived at the tank battery later that morning, to a person, they all described him as acting completely normally. It was a normal work day, even while his daughters sank in the oil and water not far away from him. And then his efforts at deception truly began. We've all seen the emotionless interviews that the defendant gives to the local media asking for help in locating his family. We watched as he claimed that the house was empty without them and that he hoped that they were somewhere safe and that he just wanted them to come home. He told investigators that they were at home sleeping when he left for work that morning and that Shanann had told him that she was taking the girls to a friend's house for the day. What is striking about this case, Your Honor, beyond the horrors that I've already described to you, is the number of collateral victims that he created by his actions. While he stood in front of TV cameras asking for the safe return of his family, scores of law enforcement officers, neighbors, friends, and family scoured the area, fretted for their safe return. They texted him begging for any information and sending him their best wishes, all the while he hid what he had done. The list of indirect victims does not end there. Think of the firefighters and the Colorado State Patrol hazmat experts who had to don protective suits.
Very true.
And who were called upon to pull Bella and Celeste.
Very horrific. People had to do that.
Or the coroner employees who had to conduct these autopsies.
Yes.
Or the victim assistants who frantically attempted to ease the suffering of those affected. All of this, Your Honor, for what? Why? Why did this have to happen? His motive was simple, Your Honor. He had a desire for a fresh start.
Mm-hmm.
To begin a relationship with a new love that overpowered all decency and feelings for his wife, his daughters, and unborn son. While Shanann texted the defendant over and over again in the days and weeks leading up to her death, attempting to save her marriage, the defendant secreted pictures of his girlfriend into his phone and texted her at all hours of the night. While Shanann sent the defendant self-help and relationship counseling books, one of which, ironically enough, was thrown in the garbage.
Wow.
He was searching the internet for secluded vacation spots to take his new love in researching jewelry. And while Shanann took the girls to visit family in North Carolina, the defendant went to car museums and the sand dunes with his new girlfriend. The stark contrast between the subjects of their internet and text content is absolutely stunning. Even the morning after he killed them and disposed of their bodies, he made several phone calls. One was to the school where the girls were supposed to start, telling the school that the girls would not be coming to school anymore, that they were being unenrolled, presumably to give him some more time before law enforcement notification about them going missing. He contacted a realtor to start discussing the selling of his house, and he texted with his girlfriend about their future. None of this answers the questions of why, however. If he was this happy and wanted a new start, get a divorce.
Exactly.
You don't annihilate your family and throw them away like garbage. Why did Nico, Celeste, Bella, and Shanann have to lose their lives in order for him to get what he wanted? Your Honor, justice demands the maximum sentence under the agreement reached by the parties. As you will recall, the agreement calls for life sentences as to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, and all of those to run consecutively to one another. It also calls for the count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy as to Nico to run consecutively to counts 1, 2, and 3. I would suggest that the extreme aggravation present in the defendant's conduct and in the efforts that I have described mandate that the sentences for counts 7, 8, 9, and tampering with a deceased human body each be the maximum of 12 years, and that those sentences run consecutively to one another. It is very clear that each of these acts, that these were not the subject of one act, but each oil tank that he walked up with his daughter's bodies and the hole that he dug for his wife and unborn son mandate a mandatory consecutive sentence. It's been alluded to this morning, but the defendant was certainly eligible for the death penalty in this case under the existing law in the state of Colorado. As you heard, Shanann's family strongly opposed my office seeking the death penalty and being bound to the criminal justice system for the next several decades. That's in large part, as you've heard, why we have reached the agreement that we have. 4 lives were lost at the hands of the defendant on August 13th for reasons that we will never fully understand, nor will we know. In the end, the Rusin family was much more merciful towards him than he was towards his wife, his daughters, and his unborn son. Prison for the remainder of his life is exactly where he belongs for murdering his entire family. Thank you.
News 9 is the source. So Shanann's family did not want the death penalty. Very interesting. Very forgiving of them. I guess maybe they have forgiven him, haven't, I don't know. But just saying they didn't want the death penalty. Maybe they want him to suffer, sit in jail every day, prison every day, and grapple with what he's done. But see, the thing people don't seem to understand about a person who has this type of mindset, they will come to accept their fate of being inside a prison, and it doesn't matter. It only matters to you because you have lost a person and you love that person. But they did not. He did not love his family. So him being in prison means absolutely nothing. The only thing is he can't roam and do what he wants to do and walk and eat and go to games and canoodle around with that woman or any other woman. That's the only difference. He doesn't have freedom. But he could care less about what you think. He's a manipulator. And it doesn't matter that he says, oh, I don't want you calling me a murderer, blah, blah, blah. He is that. That's the title he gave himself. Nobody gave him that title. When he decided to unalive his family, he gave himself that title. And we've learned that he's good at lying because he spoke to the news at talking as if he didn't know where they were when he knew all along where they were. So that shows you he's been lying a long time. That's why you have to pay attention to the details. He didn't readily admit, day one being asked where they were. Oh, yeah, I took their lives. He played the mind game a few days. And that shows you he's been doing that. He's been lying. He's been a chameleon. He's been pretending to be happy. But as the district attorney says, all you had to do was get a divorce. Go do whatever you wanted to do. But he knew he would have to pay the piper because he had small children. And then the woman had another baby on the way. So that's 3 children to take care of. I don't want to take care of them. I want a clean slate. I'm going to have a clean slate taking care of 3 kids. Rectifying debt I've accumulated with Shanann. I'm not going to be free. And that's what he saw. He still felt like, even if I told her I didn't want to be with her, walked out, moved out, I would still be in bondage in taking care of 3 children, rectifying debt. And he probably would have had a hard time because it's hard to live out there where they were living, trying to pay off debt, then take care of 3 children. He probably would have been barely living off his salary. He made a decent salary, but it's not going to go far when you're taking care of 3 kids. Then you also got to pay rent, electric, car notes, wherever you're living outside of not being married anymore. But that's a choice because sometimes relationships don't work. But you don't unalive a family because you don't want to pay the piper and pay the due bill. And he saw that. 18 years of this. Paying for children. Functions, birthdays, holidays. They wanting to spend time with me. He didn't want that. And he's not the only one. Well, Yvonne, it's not about Shanann. He made a choice to get married. He made a choice to have children. If at any time he decided he did not want to have kids, he did not have to have them. When he had the first baby and he realized it wasn't for him, he should have told his wife, I don't want any more children. I'm not adapting well. But he probably didn't want to hurt her feelings. So next thing you know, she's knocked up again. Now they have 2 children. Now she's knocked up again. They have 1 on the way. He didn't speak up. He's probably didn't care for fatherhood early on. And as I tell people, there's nothing wrong with realizing it's not for you. It's all the same. Children, pets, relationships. If you see it's not for you, you need to speak up. You need to speak up. There's no need of you being miserable trying to rear a child. Pass the baton to somebody else. That's what he should have done. Because I won't doubt that he has been miserable. He was miserable a very long time while in a relationship with her and rearing children. He probably got in over his head, and I'm assuming they did, and he didn't care. Now, maybe she wanted to continue to ride the ride, pretending they lived in this fairy tale lifestyle. I don't know, but it's not the point. Because that's not a reason to kill somebody because somebody's spending a lot of money on a chair or a Gucci bag. That's stupid. You don't kill people because somebody's got an extensive spending habit. You talk to the person. Hey, we can't afford this. Hey, this isn't working out. You don't go kill people because somebody decided to buy a new living room chair or car or whatever. You have to speak up. That's why I'm saying his problems were way bigger than the house, a chair, clothes, shoes. Those are just superficial things. He had serious issues with himself. Because as I just said, if it was not Shanann, it would have been somebody else. He could have just easily gotten a relationship with another woman and unalived her, and they had no children. They had no debt. Because you just don't unalive people because of bills. Oh, I got to pay for these kids for 18 years. But you knew that. He knew all of that. He made that choice. Because if that's the case, people have 1,000 reasons why they unalive people. Insurance money. They spent money that they lied about. So now they want to go off the person. Oh, I don't want them to know that I stole money from the bank account or I gave it to some scammer. So you're going to go kill your wife because you got scammed by somebody? Come on now. Those are poor excuses. No, you already were sinister from the beginning. Because as I said, you just don't wake up and say to yourself, let me unalive this person because I'm unhappy or I need money or I've accrued debt. That's crazy. No, you already had problems. Let's go to the oil rigs where the bodies were found. Thank you for joining me. News 9 is the source of this information as well. Oh, I think it's just a picture. Well, anyway, News 9, it's on my community page, uploaded 5 years ago. They give you a circumference area view of the oil rigs where he put the 2 small children. And what's baffling about that is what you just heard from the district attorney. The fact that he put each child in each rig, because there's 2 tall rigs standing side by side. The fact that he climbed up, carrying 1 child at a time to each rig, stuffing them through a small portal to dispose of them. 8 inches is what was said in court. It's hard to imagine that. Basically, deceiving the children. And I think we all know what that means. That's cruel. And you're standing there doing it to your child. You've already unalived them, and now you're stuffing them, literally. Into a small opening. And then he buried the wife, shallow grave. They did show pictures of that later on. The clothing the mother had. She gave birth to said child, boy child, in her undergarments. Because at death, she released the child. It's hard to believe that a human could think so low of you. And I don't condone any negative comments about Shanann because no one is perfect. And if you want to judge a woman because she had expensive habits or wanted to spend money, then there will be a lot of deceased women, if that's the case. Deceased men as well. Because there are a lot of people who like to spend money they do not have. A lot of people live off of credit cards. And that's something I've always told people. If you really knew how people lived, you wouldn't be envious of them. Because a lot of people are in debt. And they live off their credit. They don't actually have any money in their savings account. They're living off of credit cards, paying every waking bill with a credit card. Light bill, credit card. Car note, credit card. Starbucks coffee, credit card. Just stupid miscellaneous things. There's no way I'm going to accrue debt on a credit card for Starbucks coffee. $20 toaster. But that's the world we live in now. People refuse to save their money. When I was growing up, a credit card was for big ticket items, such as a washing machine, a dryer, living room furniture, paying for a heating air unit. That's what you use the credit card for, to book flights, to fly. Not $20 curtains.
Took us a while to
Let's
find
be
it
truthful.
better.
Sorry about that. If you can't save your money to buy something miscellaneous, something's wrong. There's something wrong with you. Because if you make a salary, you should have enough sense to be able to pull money out of that salary and go into the store with cash and buy what you want. You don't like it, don't work out, take it back with the receipt, get your money back. You don't have to wait for it to get back on your debit card, credit card. I've never understood people who do not understand that type of rationale. But to each his own. And then the things that everybody's going in debt over, and I'm saying this because this needs to be said, it's all coming from China. China, India, some, places like that abroad. You're breaking your neck for something that's mass produced. Something that has no value. So you think about that in this situation here with these people going in debt for buying things, shopping, whatever it was they were accumulating. 9 times out of 10, it was useless, S-H-I-T. Useless. It had no value. Clothes, shoes, furniture, pictures, whatnot. All that stuff is mass produced. You can get it a dime a dozen from Ross to TJ Maxx to Macy's. It's worthless. And people cannot seem to understand that. Now, some things are made cheaper, of course, cut costs, but in the end, it is still mass produced. And people are breaking their necks to accumulate stuff, one, they don't need, don't have room for, sit in a corner closet, stockpiling stuff, attics, rooms, basements, garages, for what? Now imagine this woman has lost her life, her and her children, because maybe she liked buying too much stuff or wasn't calculating her monies properly to buy whatever it was. That's something you all need to think about. And a lot of people live like this. They have a lot of stuff in their home, but they don't have actual cash in the bank. They don't have savings. They don't have stocks and bonds. They're miserable as hell. And you drive by these nice homes, wishing, hey, I had that nice house, that nice car. Nothing wrong with that. But you don't know what comes with that. It's called a due bill. The fancier the car, the higher the insurance. Down the road, it will start to have problems. Even with proper maintenance, upkeep. You have to spend more money for a luxury car to be repaired. Those are the things people don't think about. Accumulating debt on a credit card, well, you owe these people now for those said items. Some people want to be the Joneses so bad. But what they don't know, the Joneses are suffering. And this case shows you how sad trying to accumulate and possibly live like the Joneses or their own version of the Joneses got an entire family murdered. Alongside a man wanting another woman, living in a fantasy world. But as I said, that woman would have had expectations down the road too. And Chris Watts would have ended up back in the same ho-hum place he found himself in with his wife. And that's the thing he didn't understand. Let's get to the sentencing. Chris Watts, thank you for joining me.
So the court has considered the arguments made by the attorneys. The court has considered the statements made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family, as well as the Watts family, that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood. And I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes that the maximum sentence of 48 years would be appropriate to run consecutive to the other charges, with an additional mandatory parole period of 3 years as set forth by statute. With regard to count number 7, as it relates to tampering with a deceased body, as well as counts 8 and 9, each a class 3 felony, the court is going to impose a maximum sentence of 12 years each for those counts to run consecutively to the other counts. The court is going to order that the statutory fees be paid and court costs. The court's going to grant the prosecution 91 days to file a notice of restitution, and that will be the sentence of the court. We will shortly be in recess. I would respectfully ask the parties that you remain in your seat. There is a plan by the deputies on allowing people to exit the courtroom, so please remain seated until you are authorized to leave the courtroom based on the direction of the deputies. Deputies, I would respectfully ask that you take this defendant into custody and have him serve the rest of his life in the Department of Corrections. We are in recess.
Oh, wow. During this commentary of the judge reading him his sentence, the camera pans down to his body, and what you will see is Mr. Chris Watts' left leg shaking, foot shaking profusely while the sentence was being read. And the camera panned down and stayed down there. That was good work. To show you, he didn't want that sentence, but he rightfully deserved it. They panned to the family, parents, her parents, Shanann. I believe that might have been her brother sitting next to the mother. They're both leaning into one another. He shuffled right by those people at the end of the sentencing. Head down while the sentence was read, and head down while going past the family to go out of the door. A life wasted for nothing. 4 other lives wasted for nothing. That's the irony of this case pertaining to Chris Watts. He unalived 4 people for nothing in exchange for forfeiting his own freedom for utter nonsense. A fake ideology, a fake fantasy world he had invented in his head for another woman. Escapism to end up incarcerated and will die in prison. That to me is sad and it's pathetic. So with all that has been said in this commentary to his sentencing, the reading by the district attorney of what he did to those children and the wife, you now ask yourself, to the psychologist that called herself so immersed in talking to him and believing he was innocent, believing he's innocent of the crimes, also accusing the woman he was having an affair with as the one who committed the crime, her and her family. It's stupid and idiotic. He confessed because he knew there was evidence to show he did it. There's no way I believe that woman carried those children and that woman out to those oil rigs and went up there and put each child inside of one and stuffed them in there, skint those kids alive, skint them deceased down in there, and then climb up another one with another kid, put the other kid in there, then also discarded the wife. Come on, get serious. No woman did that. No woman did that. He's the one leaving out in the morning. Truck backed up to the garage. No coming or going by any other parties that fateful morning after the wife returned from her trip. No break-ins. Only movement is by Mr. Chris Watts. And as the district attorney said here in this commentary, we may never know why he really unalived these people. But he is diabolical. Whatever the reasoning was, whatever you think, why you think he did it. Because as I said, it was way more than the affair with that woman. That's obvious. It was much deeper than that. That was just the icing on the cake. What they would say, how the barrel got tipped over. But he has had underlying issues with himself and his wife and the kids and his lifestyle before he ever met that woman. He probably would have done it had he not even met her. And that's what people need to understand about a psychopath. Some may say that. Well, I think it's because of her. He met her. If he hadn't met her, he wouldn't have done it. But he was already checked out. That's what people don't understand. You can't say that because you don't know him. 9 times out of 10, he was already checking out of his life. You can see that with the text messages from the wife. They were probably having problems way before he met her. The financial problems, that's long before he met the mistress. Naturally, it can weigh you down owing money all the time, but you still don't plot to unalive a person because you owe somebody money. So he had deep aggression, problems, psychopathy before he met the mistress. Because as I said, you don't gain these qualities overnight and in 1 month of meeting some woman and inventing some love affair that you're going to run off into the sunset with them. You already had these jacked up mindset before you met her. And as I said before, had he gotten away with this woman would have had expectations of Chris Watts and would have expected him to meet those expectations. And he could have possibly been right back in the same scenario that he just left out of. But luckily, he told because he knew the evidence was stacked against him. So I asked these women who have been writing letters to Chris Watts, why? The world you're inventing in your head is not real. And the world he is inventing for himself in prison is not real. He's doing what he has to do to survive. And the psychologist, you shouldn't even be practicing medicine. Because it means your notion to want to contact this man is ridiculous. As I said, if you were writing a paper or working on a documentary, needing information to, give to the public about his psychosis, that would be different. But you were interested in Chris Watts, and you need to own that instead of making up excuses saying you weren't interested. He just needed a friend. Who are you to say that he needed a friend? He wants a friend. He can have a friend in Jesus. He allegedly has met God. So Jesus is the best friend you can have. How about that? He has family. And naturally, a person will get bored of talking to the same people all the time on phone calls, video chats, so on and so forth. He's still a human being, of course, but he's not genuine. So any conversation he has with anyone, it's not genuine because he's crazy. Okay? He's not well upstairs. Lied during interrogation. Lied about the scenario pertaining to the children and the wife. Because he's been lying. He's been living a lie. So he could not be genuine with anyone. Family, neighbors, friends, wife, kids, mistress, and anyone he's talked to while being incarcerated. Because Chris Watts does not even know himself. He's been checked out of the universe. That's what got him in this mess in the first place. He checked out. I want to thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful week. My movie suggestion of the week is Unsettled. Please check out the trailer on my community page. I will put up some polls pertaining to this conversation and my other conversation pertaining to Harmony Montgomery. Have a blessed week. Be safe. Enjoy the nice weather for those of you who are having warmer temperatures. I will be back with more stimulating content and commentary. Maybe later today, I will go live again, and we will listen to the neighbors who knew Mr. Watts and his family and how they felt when they found out that he was arrested for the murders of his family. And we will dissect anyone that had come in contact with Mr. Watts in a business setting, neighborly setting, also family. How do those people still feel now? Do they still believe that he committed this crime or believe he committed this crime? Do they blame him? Do they feel like he was justified in what he did? Because I look at some of the comments over the years, and there have been a lot of ratchet comments made about the wife, which is irrelevant about who she was. There is no justification for snuffing out an entire family because of what you think she did or did not do as far as finances. That's crass. Because as I said, if we're going to use that notion to unalive people, then possibly nobody would be walking around alive. If it's going to be, they should be unalive for their spending habits. Come on now. It's disrespectful. Very disrespectful. We're going to dissect that later on Tuesday. The people that knew him, the neighbors, and their commentary to the news about when they found out that he was arrested for the murders of his wife and children, and how they felt knowing they had him in their home. We'll talk about that Tuesday evening. Of course, it's Tuesday now, early morning Tuesday, 1:23 a.m. here in the High 10. Thank you all for joining me, those who tuned into this live stream and commented in the chat. I will get back with you guys a little bit later, but this is my commentary pertaining to the many women who have written Mr. Watts in prison, and the psychiatrist, Miss Christa, who coincided with he and another friend of his in prison, and how she came entangled with that guy, and how there was a rumor that they were all entangled, and there was an entanglement between the two men, and she basically says that wasn't true. Chris bought items from the commissary and gave them to him, and that's why he had those said items in his cell, but she did not believe the two had any type of sexual relationship. But as I said, in the end, you don't know what people are doing once they're incarcerated, and the fact that a man has gotten so many life sentences, he knows he's not coming out of there, and eventually he will want to have relations with a human, whether it be a woman or a man. And if he can't get a woman, then his other option is a man. It's just the way it is. Is he in love with a woman right now? And if so, who is she? And why is she wanting to be entangled with a man who's never going to get out of prison, going to die in there? And he's very fortunate to not have gotten the death penalty. Let's say that. But the family did not want it, Shanann's family. So the judge kindly obliged him. But did he deserve it? Deserve it? I say yes. So he's fortunate to even have his life. He's very fortunate. You all have a wonderful week. You've been listening to the Vault XL. Thank you.